This is another lecture in the series Principles of Ethics, created for philosophy classes at Shenandoah University. I am Professor Barry Penn-Hollar, and this lecture involves the third of our 5 moral principles, the principle of autonomy. To this point, we have considered the principles of non-maleficence and beneficence. You will recall that non-maleficence points to our sense that doing harm to people, particularly injuring or killing them, is seriously morally problematic. Beneficence points to our obligation to be of positive assistance, to act in ways that protect people from harm, relieves injury or harm, and to act in any way that makes people better off. These are basic or fundamental moral considerations, we have said, given the fact of our vulnerability to harm and injury and our mutual dependence on each other for happiness and well-being. This podcast considers another fundamental moral principle, the principle of autonomy. Autonomy is a compound word. Auto means self, as in automobile, which is a self-moving machine. Nomi is from the Greek word nomos, meaning law or rule. So autonomy refers to the human capacity for self-rule. As human beings, we have a capacity to think, value, choose, and act for ourselves as individuals. Of course, we respond to and are influenced by physical stimuli. We have been shaped by our parents, influenced by our culture. But we have a capacity as individuals, grounded in our self-consciousness, to step back from those stimuli and to step back from the ways we have been influenced by our parents or our culture, and to think, value, choose, and act for ourselves. Autonomy as a moral principle is based upon this capacity for autonomous self-rule. At its first and most essential level, autonomy is a negative principle. Like non-maleficence, it points to things we may not do, rather than to actions we are required to do. It suggests that coercion and manipulation are seriously morally problematic. There's that language again, seriously morally problematic. You should be comfortable with that by now. You understand that I mean that coercion or manipulation are serious matters, but they can be justified under certain circumstances. They aren't absolutely wrong. They're just seriously morally problematic. Got it? Coercion has to do with getting someone to do something against their will through force or the threat of something unpleasant or undesired. In the old classic film The Godfather, the head of the mafia was famous for making people offers they couldn't refuse. He would tell someone, either your signature or your brains will be on this contract. Now, the person who signed the contract and agreed to do all the things in it had hardly done so freely or autonomously. Rather, they were coerced. Their human dignity was violated. They were treated as a means to the Godfather's ends. Obviously, a threat of death is coercive and violates autonomy. Manipulation is milder, but no less a serious violation of autonomy. We manipulate people to do what we want them to do in a variety of ways. Maybe the most common one is by lying to people or misleading them, allowing them to believe something false to be true. Typically, the purpose of such deceit is to get them to do what we want them to do, something we think is in our self-interest. When people are manipulated in this way, their human dignity is violated. We fail to respect their capacity to run their lives as they would choose if they knew the truth. They are treated as a means to our end. So the moral rules that prohibit lying or deception are grounded, it seems to me, in this principle of autonomy. Let me quickly mention another important concern related to autonomy. It has to do with relationships in which one person has power of some kind over another. we are properly concerned that the weaker person in such a relationship is in no position to make truly autonomous decisions. For that reason, dating or sexual relationships between teachers and students, professionals and their clients, supervisors and the people that work under them are prohibited in many professional and institutional codes of ethics. The reason is the fear that the weaker party, the student, the client, the worker, may not be perfectly free to respond as he or she would like to the romantic or sexual advances of the more powerful person, the teacher, the professional, the supervisor, or boss. There are also positive dimensions to the principle of autonomy that have come to be recognized in contemporary reflections on the moral life. For example, in a context of professional relationships between healthcare professionals, lawyers, accountants, and their clients, it is generally recognized that autonomy obligates the professional to cooperate with their client's autonomous choices. They are obligated to use their professional skills to help their clients in the way the client asks or chooses to be helped, within the law, of course. Think about a cancer patient who faces several possible treatment options. Typically, none of those options will be ideal. However, after considering the various benefits and risks associated with each course of treatment, the patient opts for a particular course involving, for example, radiation but not chemotherapy. Generally, it would be recognized that healthcare professionals have an obligation to cooperate with the patient's choice by providing the treatment he or she chooses, and that obligation would be understood as grounded in or based upon the principle of autonomy, our concern to respect people's capacity to manage and run their own lives. Or consider the prospect faced by someone who is seriously ill without hope for recovery. Their illness or injury causes suffering and interferes with their normal human capacities. They have what might be called a low quality of life. Some patients sometimes desire, in such a situation, no further medical treatment. For example, they may desire not to be resuscitated by CPR should they experience a cardiac arrest. Most ethicists would argue that if a competent patient refuses treatment, healthcare professionals are wrong to impose that treatment on them against their will. It would violate autonomy. It would violate their dignity as a human being capable of self-rule. It also seems to me that concerns about privacy and confidentiality are positive obligations in professional and institutional contexts to respect privacy and confidentiality is also grounded in the principle of autonomy and our concern that people be able to rule or control their own lives. Privacy has been defined as having control over access to oneself, when one can be spied on or touched against one's will, or when others have access to personal information about you against your will. Your privacy is violated. The suggestion I want to offer here is that our concerns about privacy are related to our commitment to individual autonomy. Without privacy, without control over access to oneself, we would be more easily coerced and manipulated. We would be less likely to regard ourselves as persons worthy of autonomy, worthy to control our own lives. Why might we acknowledge a principle of autonomy? Why might we believe that among our most fundamental moral obligations, alongside refraining from harming people and coming to their aid when necessary, is an obligation not to coerce or manipulate, or an obligation to respect people's choices in professional contexts? We've already hinted at it. Many philosophers have argued that this capacity of ours to think, value, choose, and act for ourselves as individuals is an essential or defining aspect of what it means to be a human being. This capacity seems to be an essential or defining characteristic of human beings, one that distinguishes us from other animals. When we human beings are enslaved so that we cannot make our own choices, when we are threatened, bullied, or deceived so that we cannot do what we would do left to our own devices, our human dignity is violated in a fundamental way. Our capacity to run our own lives is disrespected. The principle of autonomy suggests that it is prima facie wrong to coerce or manipulate others to keep them from doing what they want to do, or to get them to do what we think they should do or what we want them to do. To do so is to treat others merely as means to our own ends, and fails to respect them as persons capable of thinking, valuing, choosing, and acting autonomously for themselves. The principle of autonomy does not mean, however, that it's wrong to attempt to persuade others to think or act differently. The principle does not mean, however, that it's wrong to attempt to persuade others to think or act differently. Persuasion involves giving reasons and citing relevant information that might lead to a particular conclusion. Giving reasons to others and citing true information respects their capacity to choose on the basis of effective deliberation and does not violate it. Similarly, it is no violation of autonomy to criticize a person's decisions or moral judgments in a case. If that were true, we could make no moral judgments except in our own case, and any statements criticizing or praising another are wrong or make no sense. But that's not what the principle of autonomy means. It means that it's wrong, prima facie, to interfere with another person's choices and decisions through coercion or manipulation. But it's not wrong to try to persuade them to follow a particular course of action, or to indicate to them with reasons after the fact that what they did was wrong. Throughout this class, you will be asked to write about cases that will require you to evaluate what a person did in a particular situation. You have not violated their autonomy in suggesting that what they did was wrong or right. You should resist the temptation to say, well, they can do whatever they want to. It's their choice, unless you mean that either choice they might make in the situation is morally permissible. This concludes our initial discussion of the principle of autonomy. Next time, we'll be looking at its implications in terms of the relationship between law and morality.